Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection Podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection Podcast. I'm your host, John Kaufman. All right, so those of you that follow along on the podcast a little bit, just know kind of a little bit of announcement. If you don't follow Ronan Donovan, so Ronan's exhibit at the High Desert Museum from Bend, Oregon, I believe is ending in a few weeks. So just anybody who's wanted to get up to Bend and see that wonderful exhibit, that wolf exhibit, please go ahead and do so before it moves. I think it's staying in Oregon, but no longer in Bend. And our guest today was actually part of the panel on, I believe, opening night of that exhibition there. So he is a wildlife biologist, part of the branch of natural resources for the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. He was a wildlife technician. He's an environmentalist and a hunter. He does all the things, and really, really happy to have him on here with Stephen and I. This is Austin Smith Jr. Austin, really great to meet you. And again, thanks for making the time and willing to come on with us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, really glad to be a part of this and share my story with you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just go through your background. Did you grow up on the reservation? And again, I hope that question doesn't sound so simple, but how'd that go?
That's fine. Yeah, so I'm an enrolled tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I did grow up on a reservation. Majority of my life, the res was the place where we were moved to back in the 1800s. So my background is primarily, like most native kids around here, we grew up hunting, fishing, hiking, and and only time we're not doing that is probably when we're in school, or some people actually still get sent off to boarding schools, believe it or not, but they're not the boarding schools from back in the day. They're more or less just schools that are get the kids away from the res for a bit and different change. So I never went there. I actually graduated high school from Madras Senior High School, which Madras is like 17 miles from the res. But I started working as a youth technician in 2002. So I knew I wanted to get into natural resources in some aspect, and really it was then I jumped on a crew, bunch of youth workers for natural resources. They threw us out in the woods and made us clean parks and, all the fun stuff that a technician does, pick up trash and just go out and assist biologists out on surveys from lamprey, fish, wildlife, forestry, you name it. So I got really what piqued me into wildlife and wildlife management was 2002, we did a bighorn sheep reintroduction onto our reservation. And I got to go out and assist the biologists and do inventories. And I thought it was really cool. I knew what I wanted to do the rest of my life at that point. So did multiple seasons with the natural resource program as a youth intern all the way up until 2004. And then at that point, I wanted to go to school. I had a couple of scholarships through the community college and the university here in Oregon State, but I knew it was only for the first year. And school was expensive, but at the same time, there's a lot going on in our country and around the world. So, like a lot of my upbringing is, it's a warrior society. So I knew there was a rite of passage for the warriors, and typically that was joining the military. So that's what I did. I joined the Marine Corps in 2004. Signed up when I was 17. My parents had to sign waivers for me. I graduated a little bit early. So in the springtime, I started doing my workup, and I worked all the way up until I left to boot camp in fall of 2004. And so I did multiple deployments through 2004, 2009, Operation Iraqi Freedom. And at the same time, still kept in contact with all the biologists and technicians here back home. And so I ended up getting out, separating with an honorable discharge in 2009. In 2010, I actually enrolled at the community college here in Central Oregon with a focus in forestry and natural resources. So, that part of my life, I was like, Like I knew I wanted to do something still in natural resources, but it really wasn't wildlife at that point. It was like, well, maybe forestry would be cool, you know. I was really just kind of thinking about, would that work out? So actually I came back in as a technician, and lo and behold, we did a mountain goat reintroduction project up in the Cascades. So we actually went with ODFW and captured some mountain goats and the elkhorns and delivered them to the Mount Jefferson Wilderness and on the reservation. And so then I was hooked again, right? So that was pretty fun. So that eventually I continued my way through school, got my associate's degree. I enrolled at Oregon State University Cascades campus, focusing at natural resource management and wildlife. And so I ended up graduating in 2015. And then from during that time, I was still doing internships. I was jumping back and forth different jobs, doing like some fisheries work, some wildlife work, forestry work. Um, so that was pretty fun doing all these projects and at the same time gaining that experience. And a position opened up for a field wildlife biologist with the tribe. So I applied for that and got selected, and pretty much just threw me right in there. I was tribal member, veteran, have roughly 5 years experience, and I had my degree, so
Wow.
hired me right up. They're like, "Oh yeah, you're right." So that was easy for me. So and then from there, it's kind of sailing to where I'm at now. I worked my way up. I went from a biologist to a manager over the wildlife range and ag program. And then just last year, I was promoted again to the general manager for the branch of natural resources, overseeing all the programs here for the tribes.
Wow. Yep. I mean, before we get into more wildlife stuff, what is the reservation to you? Like, what is it? What's it like to grow up there? Do you have good memories of it? Do you have bad memories of it? What's it like for you? And then also, I'm curious how the rites of passage, as it relates to tribal life, how does that translate to military? Like, what's the importance of joining the military in the context in which you grew up?
So I'll start off with the growing up on the reservation. So it's almost like, I could relate it to countries I've been to across seas. I've been to some pretty poor countries and poverty, but tight community. That's very similar to what the reservation is. You have to understand the history of our tribes and many tribes throughout Oregon and throughout the Northwest as the federal government was moving through, and a lot of private landowners were grabbing land, railroads were grabbing land, states were being developed, and so they moved all the tribes onto reservation, and it was like the most unrealistic place to live because it was all rocks and scab land that wasn't farmable or irrigate. You couldn't irrigate it, so it was all areas. So that's where most tribes were moved to, were these areas. So it's very rare, of tribes that actually obtain their traditional homelands. But for us, we're very resilient. We do come from the Big River, the Columbia. We're fish people, but we're also hunter gatherers and very nomadic tribes. So I kind of come from that both sides. My dad's side of the family was from the Big River. My mom's side was from tributaries and plateau. So these tight-knit communities moved us to the reservation, and the community itself, it's really made up of a lot of different these three different tribes: the Wasco, Warm Springs, and Paiute. And so we signed the treaty. The Wascos and Warm Springs signed the treaty with U.S. government, but at the same time, the Paiutes, they were very nomadic, still running around, basically prisoners of war when they came to our reservation. And so we growing up around them, it was a lot of poverty. There's a high percentage of unemployment. But we relied on our resources. So we had a big timber industry here back in the, I would say like 50s through the 90s, really. We're cutting a lot of board feet. And so that meant a lot of revenue back to the tribe. And so then it kind of, like any society, it goes through these peaks and drops, right? So that's kind of where we are. We actually developed a mill. We had our own mill at one point that was cutting a lot of board feet, made a lot of revenue. That means dividends back to the tribe. And so they put that into savings. And at the same time, they built a giant resort, pools and recreational areas. And then they build a casino and a hotel. And, we're doing pretty well. And then, of course, the recessions hit and poverty went, so we're kind of back in that line again. But this growing around the community, I felt like I knew who my best friends were growing up with them. We worked locally close. We took care of our aunts, uncles, brothers. A lot of non-tribals would say, "Hey, that's my second cousin, third cousin, my great uncle, great aunt." And as a kid, we always knew them as like our aunts and uncles and cousins. Everyone was a cousin, right? So that's kind of how we were just growing up in that fashion. And then a lot of the traits that you get from like our elders, we really hold them like their stories. They never write everything down, but it's always stories that were passed on and ways of living, even pre contact, right? There's a lot of those stories are still passed down to us, and so that's our history, that's our knowledge, and that's how it carries us. And it's in the language. So I'm not a fluent speaker, but I speak enough so I could understand. My 5-year-old probably knows a lot more of the language than I do, to be honest. But part of that, our language, our teachings, our foods, our resources, that kind of coincides with your last question about the rite of passage with the warrior society and as a veteran. So, there's back in the day, a lot of the young men, they would test their courage and test their strength when they go through that transition from a young boy to a man. They would go out on a war party, and typically it was stealing horses, or, back then there was a lot of slave trading, even amongst the tribes, believe it or not. That was pretty common, but not the slave trade like what happened with the Africans. It was more or less just, dentured servants, or they would capture Paiutes, Cayuse, or other tribes, Modocs, and they would build them into our tribe and make the tribe bigger. And so there was a lot of that. So part of the wars was like, all right, well, we got raided by the Cayuse tribe or the Modocs or the Paiutes. And so they would go out on a war path. And when they came home, they weren't boys anymore. They were young men. Regardless if, they got in a conflict or not, it was still that, that right to go out on your own. And you came home and maybe you stole some horses back, or you got some cattle or whatever it was. You came home, and then you could wear those feathers or wear that paint on your animal, on your horse. And so it was really, that was, in that society is, you could probably relate it to Romans and, Vikings, and how, they carried on. It was all that warrior society. So for me, I had grandpas and uncles that served in all the conflicts, even before we were citizens, right? Back in World War One, we had family that fought in that conflict. Modoc Wars, they fought in those conflicts as scouts. And then leading up to the most recent wars, the World War II and Korean War, and then the war on terrorism and all the other conflicts. I've always had someone. So I've had an older brother, older sister that served in the Army, and then myself serving in the Marine Corps. And now I have, cousins and friends that are doing the same thing. And so it was, you do have a high percentage of Native Americans serving in the military than you do any other race, believe it or not. So.
Man. Yeah, I mean, first thing for me too is just thank you for your service. Obviously, I mean, I come from a military family. My brother's still in, and my father still is overseas. So, again, the sacrifice you and your family have made, obviously to help keep this country safe is, can't be enough thanks there. Was there, because you spoke about both of your parents' side, and again moving to a reservation and having to pick up and really relocate to a place that wasn't conducive to, like you say, farming or anything, or hunting and gathering. I mean, obviously you can adapt. Did you always have a deep connection to the land, even I mean, I know you weren't part of that relocation, but was that always something that was instilled in the knowledge and the teachings and all the stuff that was passed on to you as a child, that the land there was a deep connection there, or did that grow naturally for you?
When with our religion, or our ways of prayers, I guess you call it, it evolved around the first foods that the tribes always relied on. And the first foods always have an order of how they came to us in our tales and our legends. And so there's some tribes and some tribes here that integrated some of the Christian religion into it. But like there's more to it about the resources, about how that connection is to land. And so the connection is typically in that order: is first comes water, right? So water's first. It's the most powerful, carved lands. It's life, right? But it can also take life. So water, and then as the water's here, then when the earth was being created, and the fish and the deer and the elk and the birds were here, and they came upon human, which was us. The creator asked, like, all right, who's going to give themselves first to this pitiful being? Right. And so the fish came forward first. So they were like, we will give our flesh to these humans. And then next came the deer, right? And the elk. And then the roots and the berries. And eventually they all were in that order. That's how they came to us. And so it's still that way, how we have those seasons to this day. We have those set seasons of, all right, first comes the fish in the springtime and the summer, and then you have the berries and the roots, and then the deer and the elk and the bears and the lions give themselves. So we have an order that, and part of that is the protection of those. So, we always take that teaching as a young kid, you need to protect this. This is yours. It wasn't given to you to mismanage. It was given to you to be taken care of. And if you don't take care of it, it's going to go away. And so that's echoed throughout our longhouse. Like you need to protect those resources. And that, it talks about the water, talks about, like, in order to have good water, clean water, that means clean runs for fish. And that means nutrition for the animals that depend on it, and at a young age, I already understood that, they're like this nutrient cycle. Fish go down the ocean, get all these nutrients, bring them up. Bears eat them, go out, eat, scatter them across the land. Berries grow, deer and elk and eat those berries or grass, and then we shoot those. And so it was just going in. So I totally understood that. And I wasn't the only one, though, too. There's people out there that, like loggers that we have, or woodcutters. They know that, like, well, if we don't cut this wood, it's just going to burn, and we need to also cleanse the land so that more can grow. So they understood that aspect of it. And once the federal government got involved, and, they wanted a certain way. So they didn't allow us to burn anymore, like burn huckleberry grounds, root grounds, clear these areas out, because they said, oh, that needs to be protected. I'm like, okay, starting to understand that aspect, but you can protect too much. And yeah, and that gets to where, when I talk about our reservation, it's 643,000 acres that was reserved to us to live on, to be a sovereign nation. But we were also ceded. We weren't given anything. We reserved the right to these areas. We already had these rights when Europeans came over and created these laws. So we reserved the 10.2 million acres of our ceded lands. But, those borders were drawn because, we're becoming the last ones as everyone moved west, right? There's already treaties made. So you had, like, the Nez Perce, the Umatilla, the Yakimas created their treaties, and they kind of carved out their lands. And they knew, like, well, this is Warm Springs people. This is their area. So they kind of created our eastern border for us. And then we were able to, retain our areas of our fishing areas along the Columbia River. And then we wanted to go back down into Willamette, because that's where a lot of our families and our people travel to, is Willamette Valley. But they told us, oh, there's too many settlers down there. Of course, that's, if you know the history of the Oregon Trail, that's where everyone went. The east was Oregon Trail, went right to the Willamette Valley and the different areas. So we couldn't retain those areas. So they drew a line over the crest of the Cascades. And so that drew our western boundary of our ceded lands and our reservation. And then this arbitrary line called the 44th parallel to the south of us, that would be our southern border of our ceded lands. But also what's strong with our treaty is we were able to obtain what's called usual and custom use stations, which when you hear that, you're like, what does that mean? So these are areas at the time, the chiefs and the clan leaders knew there was other families already out during the treaty signing back in June 25th, 1855. They're like, there's already clans out in these areas, during the season. So I was thinking June, they're probably down in the Willamette catching eels, or up in the mountains picking berries, or down south hunting, antelope. So they knew like, well, I still want to preserve their areas and so they call these usual and custom use station, or areas where we go outside of the ceded land boundary to go and hunt, harvest, and gather. So they're able to retain those. So we still have that right to this day, and it's written into our treaty, and the federal government's recognized that, and the state agencies are still almost there, but we still, to this day, we still exercise it, and but that's just pretty unique to our treaty. But that's kind of getting back to like that deep connection to the land.
Wow. I mean, yeah, there's so much. Yeah, I can't even imagine what that's like to have borders made and things of that sort. I mean, it really goes into a lot of what you're saying just about the background and the history. I mean, when I was reading up on your bio and just listening to your talk that you gave back in March, you really encompass all of these things, because your presentation was not only about the land itself, but about how you yourself and the tribes are managing it. I mean, talking about mule deer studies and rangeland management and wild horses, and you mentioned the bighorn sheep reintroduction. This is all really, it seems, for the benefit of the land itself, not just to be doing scientific study and to bring that information back. It just seems like this was such an easy situation for you to fall into, right? Because of your background. Did you feel that way? Obviously you said you had 4 or 5 years of experience in terms of school, but did you feel really ready for this, to do this type of work and do all these things that I just mentioned that you guys that you're doing and you're heading up now?
I guess in terms of being ready for it and that background, I knew that there was a need to protect and preserve resources, but I didn't always have those tools or the best management practices out there. So that's where leaned on the different agencies. There's a lot of professors, a lot of professionals, a lot of studies that go on. We've done our own mule deer studies, right? Figured out like what's killing all our deer, where they migrating to, what type of habitat we need to protect or develop. Same thing with the rangeland. We've looked at the land, but we've relied on, so we've gone to like BLM, talked to them about their rangeland management, what they're doing with horses and horse management. And then we work pretty closely with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife on some of the trend data for mule deer, elk, and other game species, and like really what their studies are. So we kind of coincided with asking the same question, right? So like, imagine we're doing a thesis on, all right, what's going on with mule deer? Why are they all dying all of a sudden within this past 100 years? And a lot of our thing is it's development, right? It's people and how do they impact that? But at the same time, there's more to it than that. There's climate change, there's change transition ground, there's the fact that maybe we're at the extent of the mule deer's territory, and where we transition into blacktail habitat and blacktail population. So we have to understand all of that as well. And for me to understand that, I really did look on ODFW. And then, of course, with endangered species, we know that those are indicator species that they can tell you if the habitat, if the forest if the rangeland or if the water is doing, if they're in the right stance of the right um, condition for all the other animals. So, kind of like that umbrella species that if you
Mm.
ensure that, like say bull trout are in the cold water that's clear and clean, they're going to indicate that, hey, that's good water for steelhead and chinook, coho, and all those. So we use that same thing with like the other endangered species, spotted owls, wolves, and different bats, and even down to the bugs and the birds and the bees, right? All those things. If they're doing it right, we're doing something right on our management level. And so that's where we leaned on our federal agencies. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they're really strong here. We've worked with Emily and John Stephenson, a few other names out there that they've came to the reservation, did formal and informal consultation with us when we do these large scale projects, whether it's a timber sale, a road being developed, culvert being replaced or any of that sort. And, it's not only with the wildlife service, it's also with the NOAA and NOAA fisheries on, if we're impacting steelhead ground because there's listed species here on the reservation, or maybe, we go back to the rangeland, we talk to like some of the like OSU Extension Office or Oregon State College, and they're doing rangeland studies, and they can tell you, they send out interns and grad students, and they can do their small studies on our landscape and answer some questions. So all those tools are out there, and my job as a tribal member and educated, it was to bridge that gap, because for the longest time it was BIA and non-tribals here telling the tribal members what was best for them, right?
Wow.
Without any input other than like, hey, you just don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you. And there's actually lawsuits that happen and settlements because of that. So that's where we're at now. That's why we are do self-regulate, and we still work with those acronym agencies to this day, and it's good relationships. Sometimes rocky, but good.
Yeah.
So I just have some basic questions before we get into the wolf stuff about kind of how you collaborate with the federal agencies. I know you are mentioning how you collaborate with them and how you, I think you use the phrase lean on them. But as a sovereign territory, do you have to follow what the state's doing or what the federal agencies in the area are doing in terms of populations and hunting quotas, or can you guys make up your own regulations? And if you can, are there a lot of them that are different or that don't coincide with the surrounding regulations for the state and BLM land and all those things?
So with the federal agencies, depending on what type of funding we're getting, so like if say we put in for like an ESA grant or any of that sort to do some treatments, we have to abide by some fashion of Endangered Species Act, right? But we don't always have to, it depends. But to be, a good neighbor, we do, because we know that, hey, these are good resources to indicate on, good resources to build around. And so we do. So we do that with all the endangered species on a reservation. We're aware of it. When they do migrate through, we're aware of it. And we try to manage and protect it just like we do. We've adopted a lot of that. And, we don't do NEPA process. We have our own, which is accepted by the federal government. It's called the Integrated Resource Management Plan, or IRMP, as we call it. So that plan was developed back in the 90s and adopted back then. And so the BIA recognizes that as our management plan when we go through a step-by-step process for like a timber sale comes to us, and say we're going to be cutting 15 million board feet in like 7,000 acres of land, and we identify what type of treatments would be less detrimental. Every resource is you've checked the box, like, all right, we have to exclude all of the buffer areas for stream, for water quality, for old growth, for owls, for eagles, for goshawks, for huckleberry ground, for root ground. So we remove all of these things maybe there's some elk wallows or fawning and calving ground. So we exclude all of those areas and you come up with a sale. So that's kind of the IRMP process. You have issues on there like in best managed practice that standards are pretty much that's the Bible. You follow that, right? There's set standards in there. And then BMPs or best management practices, those are more or less, hey, this is the best thing to do in the situation. So and it's everything from each issue from fish, wildlife, water quality, soil side, all of that's involved. Cultural resources, there needs to be section 106 even on our projects as well as off reservation projects. We still follow that. So protection of cultural resources is really common on there. Um, and then our own regulations, that's more and less our own regulations is IRMP. And on top of that, when we regulate for fishing, hunting, on a reservation and off the reservation, we use our own rules and regs. A lot of them are mirroring some of the states, like hunting times. So we only hunt during the times when in the summer, we don't usually hunt at all during the summer. We're usually fishing, right? And so we set our own regulations based off of a sustainable harvest. So on a reservation, we have maybe a 3 to 4 week season for deer, and that includes archery and rifle. So it's all limited on based off of a management objective that's in our IRMP. So maybe there's a ratio like, all right, we need $20 per 100 does. And in order to meet that, you can only set the season this long and give out this many permits. So that's what we do. And we do the same thing for off the reservation. We have a memorandum of understanding with ODFW on how we hunt, and we meet with them and we say, all right, what's this area look like for hunting? How many deer are there? They'll tell us, right? It's like, oh, we flew and we understand, we did study, this is how many deer. We're going to be giving out this amount of tags to the general public. And like, so we'll let them know like, all right, well, that's really good and all, but keep in mind, this is the areas that we want to go to and harvest X amount of deer. So they incorporate that into their numbers and their trend and their counts. So they're like, all right, so they understand that the tribe will maybe come in and kill 30 deer out of a unit. In comparison, the state in one hunt alone, they'll kill 1,700 deer in one weekend, probably. So that's in comparison, like, we have smaller hunters, but it's specific to areas and specific to the families. So we do work pretty closely with ODFW, and they try to manage the best they can, get a lot of, so like we have a update for the mule deer management plan coming up, and so they have to do consultation with us, and so those regulations are developed off those consultations on like what's the carrying capacity for mule deer, what's their habitat, what's their numbers, what's sustainable, what can we do better, how can we assist those departments out. So same thing with fishing. Fishing the same way. We meet with multiple tribes and multiple states on fishing and fishing regulations on what's sustainable harvest. So,
Are there things that you're aware of, or conversations going around that state agencies have certain issues with wildlife, whether it be management problems or population problems or calving rate issues, that you on the reservation don't have because you manage something differently or you have a different way of looking at something, and so it works differently on the reservation than it does on other land designations?
well, predator management comes to mind. We're allowed to hound and take lions in that fashion, that form of hunting. I know in the state it's been banned. That wasn't banned by any agency, it was banned by by the people that voted back years ago before our time anyways. I know that we can do that, and those type of predator removal has helped us in watersheds in terms of mule deer management, and as well as managing livestock. A little bit different. So we have like an exponential amount of horses here on the reservation, and we're able to remove horses at a high rate as well if there's an outlet for them. So I know that different agencies can't do that. You know, they kind of just house horses and they're not able to really remove them from the range. So we've been able to do that these past few years, and it helped a lot for game management. Just put a little bit of relief on the winter range and some of those home ranges for deer and elk. And but I know BLM has a really hard time with that. They can't remove animals from areas. Or even like our timber sales, we can go into a forest and push the timber sale through to address the encroachment disease and maybe some old growth that's just falling apart, and it needs to be thinned out to so that everything doesn't get burned up in the next burn. Well, I know in the Forest Service they can't do that. We have dedicated areas that are called conditional use, and you treat it like wilderness, yet we can go there and do some management to help out and regenerate, because a lot of the wilderness areas holds our huckleberries. So we could go in there, do some thinnings and throw some fire in there, and then huckleberries come back, and then all the birds and bees and everything comes in, pollinates, and deer and elk utilize it. So we're able to do stuff like that, which I know the federal agencies like the Forest Service can't do that. I mean, a lot of areas are getting locked up. Wilderness is getting locked up, and it's just growing, and more likely it's going to burn, and you're going to lose all that habitat and a lot of species, and you're going to have to start over. It's just that successional stage of forest. It's we don't believe it's natural by doing that. We think natural is going in there and, you know, because we evolved with this land. You know, we used to burn, we used to cut, we used to do all that. Of course, we don't do that anymore for sure. Um, but we'd like to see that more. If we can do it here on the reservation and showcase that, and I hope that the agencies understand that.
So are you seeing issues with wild horses and other native ungulates?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. To the point where they're chasing them off springs, off of cabin fawning ground.
Yeah, because they're big.
Yeah. Oh,
They're
yeah.
big.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
Wow. That's wild. I mean, it really seems like yourself and the members there have a different, obviously a different way of looking at management, and almost in terms of it almost seems like you're regeneratively farming or keeping the land cycling in a way that's more natural, as opposed to, as you said, old growth. I mean, we had this in California probably what was it, 4 or 5 years ago. We really had all those wildfires, and all of this stuff was not managed correctly. And it burned for so long. There was so much undergrowth, and that's what happens when it's not managed to that point. I guess going to, I'll bleed into the wolf angle here a little bit, because we were talking about, you mentioned predators a little bit. Go into the background, I guess, of the tribe or the tribe's feelings on wolves, what it was, if you have any knowledge from prior to you about what was that coexistence like, if there was any, with wolves in the area, and what they mean in some of the teachings or in some of the stories or anything that was passed down through generations.
Mm-hmm. So like a lot of, you know, our creation stories, legends evolve, you know, goes around the teachings of our brothers, of our teachers, or is the wolves, lions, bears, and the coyotes, and eagle, right? So these are like your top predators in our area. And believe it or not, there used to be grizzly bears here. There used to be wolves here. There's a lot of lions and a lot of black bears and coyotes across the whole landscape. So a lot of those teachings is they helped out our people as we came into this area. They showed us where the herds were for deer and pronghorn. Even far back as like when there used to be bison and mammoths and camels here, right? There's those teachings that like they used to follow them, and so the people used to follow them as well. But there also was teachings of when you hunt them and when you don't hunt them. So, you know, there was a time, and that understanding is there. But a lot of it was around the fact that wolves were to be protected. They were to be wolves, bears, lions, coyotes. They were to be understand as equals of our people. But also they were also you hunted them during a certain time, and they protected you. And so a lot of like, say, how dogs came to our tribe came from wolves, right? So they always laugh around about res dogs, but before res dogs, it was, you had some sort of dog in your village. Well, that dog just didn't climb out of the ground from nowhere. They came from coyotes,
Yeah.
It came from that species of canid. And so they were protectors. If you go further up north to our cousins up in Alaska and Canada, they use those animals for transport. We use them for protection. We use them for following us and helping us out. There's tribes to our northeast that eat them. There's tribes to our south that eat them. So, they're all part of that. For my tribe itself, we really didn't. A lot of wolves were extirpated from us back early 1900s. And so for us, my grandparents can remember wolves, but it was a long time ago for them when they were kids. So they knew of them, and then they speculated they were still here. When my grandpa was born in early 1920s, and so he speculated that there were still wolves in the area, and there probably was. Um, but then going into the legend part of it in our tribe, they have these certain religious dances. They do the wolf dance, they do the lion dance, they still do the bear dance. A lot of kids will do the bear dance. So these predators, they were really respected for their strength and for their teachings, and that belief is still carried on to this day. So a lot of people actually still they hold the name wolf in their name somewhere. It could be their Indian name, or it could just be their given Christian name. It has some sort of part of their name. So I know we have at least like 3 or 4 Wolfmans. That's their nickname in the community here. So, um, but yeah, so if we have a name, we have an Indian name for it. It's Khalish, right? That's the name for wolf. So that's how I grew up. I know the Khalish and the Spiliai. That's the wolf and the wolf and the coyote. Big brother and little brother, right?
Nice.
So little brother is a little smarter. He survived the excavation. Yeah.
I'm going off the rails today with weird questions, but I have another. So whenever we've talked to a handful of folks from different tribes. You all seem to have something in common. I'm sure you have many differences and many things in common as well. But one thing you all have in common is you have this very sort of it's hard to describe. I guess it's a spiritually connected, some in touch, tapped in feeling about hunting animals. So I want to ask a question that it may seem like a devil's advocate question, but I have my own answer to this question as well. How does one respect something and then also want to kill it?
Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, from where you come from your culture, how does that thought kind of come full circle?
Yeah, I totally understand that. So I will use the like the mule deer. It is respected, the fact that it provides subsistence. Every form of it is a part of our religion. Um, Everything is utilized from it when we hunt it, but we see that it lives a life of cycles, and how they live. I remember following a mule deer around for like 5 years, and we captured her in the springtime, threw a collar on her, and she traveled from the reservation, our flats from the reservation, up to I don't know if you guys know where Frog Lake is, up near Mount Hood in our area, but it's like at the base of this mountain, which is like, I mean, that's like 60, 70 miles away. But it took the same path every year, and you knew exactly the weekend it would take off. And it was amazing on like that respect for it. And you knew like, hey, there's a couple of points here on its way up to this mountain. Like, I bet you she dropped a fawn somewhere in here because she's hanging out a lot more. And so, yeah, sure as heck, I'd go up there as a technician, and I'd just like, oh, there's a fawn here with her. And she would like run away and try to get me to follow her, but there'd be a fawn laying there, and I'd just leave them alone, just let her do her thing. And eventually, she did this for multiple seasons, and we knew like, all right, this collared animal is going to continue to do this, but it was showing us that we have deer that live on a reservation, we hunt, but it moves off the reservation. And during her time when she was up there, she was showing us where she went for the summer range. And then she came back to her winter range and it was on the reservation. And then she bred down here. So you had rut happening. And but then we also had collared bucks. You had other collared does, and they were shooting off these other areas, but they all had these family lines. So she did that same travel. Her fawn, that was a doe, did that eventually. We grew up and was so they all followed these same paths. And that was, I could really respect that because it's just like us as humans. We have our habits. We are creatures of habit. We travel these different areas, and that's how our people were too. We went to our summer range to go pick huckleberries, to fish, our winter ground. And then to the hunting part of it, we respected it so much, but at the same time, we know it provided not only nutrition for us, proteins for us, but also that we respected enough that we used its hide, so they would make buckskin out of it. They would use the tools from it to make that buckskin. So everything you need to make a buckskin clothes is on that deer. The ribs would be used to scrape the hide, the brains there to tan it and cure it. I mean, teeth are on there. All that stuff's there just for you to make clothing. So, and then even like the hooves, you can utilize those for jewelry, for trading. Teeth, in bigger cervids, they have ivory in them. So that's like for trade, for currency. So everything was provided to us, and that was provided by the creator for us. And so we had to respect that. So we took care of it. And then so when you harvest your first animal, there's called this first kill ceremony. And you don't consume it, you give it away to an elder or someone that can't hunt for themselves. And then everything that you used on that hunt, whether you're using a bow or a rifle or a knife, whatever, you gave that away to a younger hunter so that they have that, so they can utilize and recycle it. And then you give your rifle away to an older hunter because they taught you that way to hunt, right? So it could be your uncle, it could be your dad, your older brother.
Wow.
You give it away, and then in return, they give you a rifle that they had, right? So it's this
Wow.
exchange that happens. And so, and all of this is around the deer. And so
Amazing.
then leading up to your death, so when you pass on, you're wrapped in buckskin, in the white buckskin. And that we're always told that's how you're met to the other side. This is just one life. The next life they'll greet you because you're covered in that buckskin. And so that deer will take care of you here, and then it'll take care of you in the next life. So that was an understanding I was raised with. And that's, I still really care for that and cherish it and understand it. It just gives me more of a sense of, hey, we are at balance here. We're not above them or below. We're all in the same line. We should live that way. I hope that answers your question, or just
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Is
Totally,
it the
yeah,
same,
beautiful.
Austin, is it the same with predators like you were saying before, bears and coyotes and wolves and eagles? Is it roughly the same, or are there just little different variations for each?
Yeah, it's very the same. Like they'll do bear dance, lion dance, and the wolf dance. They're rejoicing for that animal given its life and the courage. Like a kid will get a bear name. And he'll be walking around the bear dance, so he had to do a bear dance showing strength or wisdom or whatever. It was pretty neat.
So cool.
Just growing up around, I thought, that's really cool. And then I tell my buddies, they'd laugh about it. They're like, I've never heard that before. Like, well, these are old teachings that we were, they still exist. And I'm sure every culture had their own teachings, like
Right.
we're just, because we're the remnants of here in America, I'm sure like your tribe you come from, where your family comes from, they've had that. It's just that disconnect
lost,
has happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no passing down of that for the most part, for certain cultures, I guess, or certain family members. Describe, I guess, what that all, again, just hopping back into the wolf thing for a minute. What did it mean, I guess, when you guys were, you had seen that wolves were starting to infiltrate back. I know you were talking mostly in your discussion, which, by the way, we'll have in the description of the podcast. So I keep referencing so everybody who's listening will be able to watch it. But you spoke about, I think, the White River Pack, OR 93. What was, I guess, just the cultural and to a degree scientific meanings for a lot of this, for not only the tribe, but also what you were trying to do in terms of understanding wolves trying to infiltrate back, coming back into their native range, and hopefully trying to complete, these circles with, bears hopefully trying to infiltrate back. Coyotes, like you said, never really left to a degree. But what were the significances of those sightings for that scientific information, and then culturally for wolves to be back in the reservation, or even in and around the reservation where they are currently?
Yeah, so a lot of the management we do here, it depends on, the population habitat, if it's doing great. And when wolves start coming back into the picture in Oregon, when that one wolf swam the Snake River and it would start making its way west into our area, everyone knew about it. Everyone's like, oh, there's a wolf coming. And on our reservation, we have a lot of livestock owners, a lot of horse and cattle owners, right? But then we also have a lot of avid hunters. And so some of them were worried. Some of them were thinking like, oh, these wolves are going to come over and take over the area and push these animals around. But lo and behold, these wolves just kind of came through the res and passed through, and they headed south. So like OR 7, he headed south. He didn't set up shop here. He obviously passed through the reservation, so like we could look at the GPS points and see. And so that kind of gave us an idea, like, all right, well, a lot of times when wolves set up shop somewhere, it's in a place where they have good, good prey base for them to live, to pair up, to develop their territory. And so like if they're indicating like, all right, they're not setting up on the res, we need to do something about it. So I'm thinking like early 2000s, right? And so in my career at that point, I was thinking like, all right, well, I know we're doing a lot of forest management, rangeland management, and at the same time we're doing horse removals, and livestock owners are starting to get more serious about keeping their cattle in a home base, rotating pastures. So, and then a lot of people were selling their cattle because, there's a lot more, I guess, getting out of that lifestyle. It's a transition of, we used to be farmers, and we're from fishermen, hunters, to farmers and livestock owners, and now like we have a casino, and then we have timber sales, so we don't need to make so much money, and jobs change. People start working desk jobs, and so kids don't want to be ranchers and farmers, so the grandma and grandpa get rid of their animals, so, and the kids don't want to do it, their parents don't want to do it. So realizing that that's just a transition that was happening here. And so it meant less cattle to worry about, but there still was remnants of cattle owners still here. I mean, my family owns cattle, run horses, and then the management. So as we got through, I guess I'm going into the timeline of when wolves started arriving here. Wolves started coming here, and then pretty soon they started hanging out here, not as packs, but just, they're hitting these little, say it was a roadkill or a horse died or a cow died, they're hitting the bone piles and they're getting sightings of them. So I remember back in like, I think it was like 2010 or 2012, I got a call about where a dead horse was over the spring. And they said, oh, I seen a wolf up here, and it was on this pile of bones. And I'm like, a wolf, you sure? And they're like, yeah. So I get up there, and yeah, we see some tracks, and they're a lot bigger than a dog, a lot bigger than a coyote. So we had nothing to confirm that it was wolf or just a wild dog. And the person giving the report was fairly reliable, but we've had that happen before in the community. People say, oh, it's a wolf, it's someone's giant husky.
Right.
Right.
So all of that adding up, and eventually we started doing these timber sales, and we're removing a lot of vegetation. Elk start coming in these areas, and the elk populations start exploding. And then the horse populations are decreasing because we're moving them and selling horses, getting them off the reservation, rotating areas. And so it started doing this whole fashion where deer and elk population is getting up there. And lo and behold, in 2013 through 2018, really, that population grew to the point where we had really good bull ratios and buck ratios that were beyond our management objectives. So we're like, I know we did classification and flights in 2016, a really good flight, good snow year, pushed a lot of animals out of the mountains. So we classify a bunch of elk and deer, and we're like, oh yeah, look like the ratios were 29 bulls per 100 cows. That was really good ratios. That's a lot of bulls. That sounds good. I'm like, that's good for the hunt season. And the same thing with the deer. It's well over 20 deer per 100 does. And then the calving and the fawn ratios were up too. So we're like, oh, we're doing really good. And I think what we're doing with all these rotation of timber sale, rotation of burning, rotation of removing animals helped out. And then lo and behold, of course, guess who shows up? I mean, we get one of our foresters calls me up and sends me a picture, look like a blurry picture of two animals. I'm like, those look like giant yeah. So they're wolves.
Wow.
Went out, started setting up trail cameras, and we got this blurry picture of what looked like a wolf. Um, and so we started thinking like, all right, well, we need to start talking to some experts about wolves and wolf management. So that's where the Wildlife Services got involved. So they're a trust resource we lean on and tell them like, hey, who's the experts on this? And so they sent a guy out that he works the whole region. He works pretty much all of Oregon. He came out and he's an older gentleman, very knowledgeable. He knew how to trap, knew how to call for wolves. So I just hung out with him for multiple, showed me how to trap and showed me how to do everything. And his name was John Stephenson, and he did a lot of work here in Oregon with wolves on the Rogue and Cascades, and traveled around. And he did a lot of ESA, right? ESA listed species from bull trout, wolves, and owls, whatnot. So, but he came to our res, helped us out, and so he helped us out. We captured a couple of wolves here. But during that time when we first identified them, it was just like, all right, there's something going on in this area. It's pretty isolated. Post timber sale, post burn, elk show up. I mean, it was like pretty neat because you could drive out there and not see anybody, but you could run the roads and find giant scat, big old tracks on all these roads, and like, man, there's something out here living. That really helped us out. Like, oh, all right, there's something out here, and so we end up getting. I was out looking for wolf tracks and scat, and I kind of narrowed it down from this 10 mile square all the way down to a mile square unit. So I was like, all right, they have to be in this area. It's summertime. There's only water here and there. If there's wolves in this area, they have to be here. So me and a youth worker, one of my youth techs, like when I started, came out with me, and we see all these paw tracks down this trail. So I jump out. I tell him, hey, let's go. Let's moving on this trail. And he's like, all right. All these tracks, all these cameras we've been putting out all summer. He still hasn't seen a wolf. So, it's a high school kid. And we're walking up, then I look up, and then you see this brown thing just walking, and then it dashes into these trees and disappears. And it was the size of a coyote. And the kid was like looking at me, and I was like, yeah, that looked like a wolf. He's like, that thing was small. I think that's a pup. So me, I run over there and I threw up a camera in this little area, like kind of like almost looked like an elk wallow, but it's all brushy. You could tell that there's a lot of activity in there. So I threw up a camera, got the heck out of there. Didn't even lock it up. I just threw it up and just left it and set it. And I told the guy, like, oh, well, you seen potentially a wolf pup your last day at work here. You're going back to school next week. Let's see if we get anything. And he was excited. So we let a week go by. So I went out there. I took the forest manager with me. I said, hey, can you come help me out? I'm going to check this camera. And so we sneak in there, evening time. And I take the card out, switch the card in, boogie back, and I throw it in my laptop. And lo and behold, there's looked like that one of the alphas and 3 pups running around this camera. Wow. So that was our first time we're like, oh, shoot. So we do have wolves here and they're breeding. And so they're like, man, that was really awesome. All right.
Wow.
So that was our first indicator of a breeding pack. And that was a White River pack.
So
Um,
whenabouts was that you started to recognize that there are wolves here and it's like a thing we need to pay attention to?
that was about 2013 through 2016. And then 2018 is when we really identified that they were like a breeding pair because they were always moving up and down. I just didn't have the resources. I was working on timber sales, hunting regulations, law enforcement stuff. And so, like, I really try to spend most of my time doing wolf stuff, but I try to do as much as I could. Being that we had an active timber sale, post sale and harvest and monitoring, that was part of it. It's like, all right, what's utilizing this post harvest? So that year, and then 2018, we began going out again looking for them because that was actually just a rendezvous site. It wasn't an actual den or anything. So that's where they just went and hung out next to water. And so the following year, I really wanted to find that den. I wanted to know where they're moving from. And so I started looking for scat, driving roads, hiking around. And really what I started doing is just strategically placing cameras where I wanted to see direction of travel. So I started getting direction of travel and they're carrying stuff, right? So they're carrying something dead.
Right.
Skunks, turkeys, rabbits, everything, horse legs. It was crazy. Yeah, they're taking foals down. So it was neat. It was like, all right, they're going this direction, so I'm gonna go that way and go figure out what they're doing. So I was driving on the road one day and I smelled something god awful stink, and most people, would be like, "Oh, something's dead. Let's get out of here." Me, I just like, holy crap, slam on the brakes. I want to find where that dead thing's at. So I get out, start wandering around, sniff my nose in the air, like, all right, it's over here. There's giant log piles throughout this whole unit. They cut a lot of incense, a lot of cedar, and they can't market cedar, so they'll just leave it. And of course, cedar doesn't rot very fast and it stays there for years. So you have like dozens of these cedar piles. So I walked over to the cedar pile and I looked down and there's like scat laying everywhere. And there's legs from an ungulate. His hooves laying there, like, oh shoot, something's. And my thought at first was like, well, maybe this is a coyote was chewing around on the leg and left it here. But I was looking at the scat and I was like, oh, there's a lot of it. And as I'm standing there on this log deck, I look down and there's this little brown thing, grayish thing, start moving inside the deck. I'm like, oh crap,
Oh no.
something alive down there. So I wanted to run back and grab my camera, my Canon, my DSLR. And as I do that, I just see this thing corner of my eye, my peripheral, run out from underneath the log deck, and it's a darn wolf,
Wow.
mama wolf running out, and she's mad. She's like yipping and growling and barking at me, howling, and she was like feet away from me. So I'm like, what do I do? Continue. So I go back, grab the camera on the truck. My heart's pounding. I've been in combat zone. I'm just like trying to get my nerves. I'm just like, this is exciting. And that wolf is howling and yipping at me and howling. And then pretty soon down the hill, I hear more howling. So it must have been the pups from last year that are a little bit older now. They're start howling, but they're in the trees. And this log deck's kind of in a little meadow. Not really a big meadow, a little bit of meadow in the shade. And then pretty soon the log deck starts howling. Little tiny pups, they all start howling. So everything's howling around me, and the whole time that thing's showing its teeth at me. And I was pretty excited. I tried to get a video of her. She went running around me. They started kind of circling me. So I was like, oh shoot, I better just get out of here. So same deal. I ran over, grabbed the camera, set it up, threw it around the big old pumpkin tree closest to the log deck. And the whole time Mama's like, I'm between the tree, the log deck, and Mama's right here. So I'm in between their pups. So I was thinking like, well, if she was going to bite me, attack me, it already would have happened. So I'm pretty sure she's just trying to get me to get out of there, letting them know, they're here. So they're all howling. Log deck's howling. I got the camera up. Pretty sure it's all set. Boom, boom, boom. All right, jump, run back to the truck, jump in there and get out of there. And immediately start getting a hold of the state wolf coordinator, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, letting them know I'm pretty sure I found the den. There's pups in there, size of little guys, and yeah, so I ended up coming back a couple weeks later and positively ID'd that yeah, there was pups and you could see them running around on my camera.
Wow. So they stayed there.
Started counting them all. It was really cool.
They
Wow.
stayed there after you had showed. They didn't take off.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I wasn't there long. I was there minutes.
Wow.
Wow.
But it felt like an eternity,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Wow.
And
That is-
yeah, there was 6 pups in that litter that year. Thousands of pictures, and finally I got the only shot with all 6 in there was a little video of them all howling. So the mama or dad or siblings are coming back in the middle of the night and they're howling in the background, and then all the pups start howling.
So
I shared it. I think it was shared on the news, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service shared that as well as like, oh yeah, the White River pack, and the first pack to be found in the Cascades in this area, Central Oregon. So yeah, it was exciting. Coming face to face with a wolf, and I've never heard of wolf attacks. I didn't really fear for my life, but I was excited. I didn't think that the alpha female was going to attack me. I didn't think the sub adults down the hill coming towards me were going to attack me or anything. I just felt like they wanted to know I was there, and I'm pretty darn sure they had my scent already, so they kind of knew I was in the area because I spent a lot of time all summer up in that area, and so they figure, oh, he finally found us. Yeah, that was first real confirmed den we found.
They just want to say, "Hey, Austin." That's all it was. Just a hello.
Yeah.
Man, that is an incredible story, man. That's unreal. I mean, where do wolves? What's the future like for wolves on the reservation in those areas? Where do you think they're going to go? Are they repopulating well? I know Colorado just took 10. I don't believe they took any off the reservation or around the reservation. But what's the populations looking like? Where does sort of the future land for any of those packs that are there?
Well, since we found the White River pack, there's these other packs that have been kind of showing up on the reservation. Now I'm telling you, there's 643,000 acres of a mixture of scrub oak, rangeland, up to pine forest, into mixed conifers and subalpine. So you have a great diversity of habitat, and you have a diversity of different cervids that use that habitat. And so we end up getting so White River pack sounds like the last time I was out on that pack, I'm pretty sure the alpha he was gone. So the male, he's pretty old. I think the first time we seen him was 2013, wandering and paired up with this female, and they've had multiple litters. But I think in 2020, after we collared Aura 93, that pack had lost the breeding male, and so it kind of created a different dynamic there. So, and then a lot of pups took off. Aura 93 took off. And then so that pack kind of dwindled down. The strongest it was that I remember was 12 wolves at one time. And then now they dwindled down to, I think they're at like 4 now. I think they identified a new breeding pair there. Probably the pups identify the breeding pair with that from the different the alpha there. And then we put on a couple of collars there. They didn't last very long in the area. They were subadults, so they juveniles. They just took off, and they were always a male. So it's like, lo and behold, the male's interested, and it's going to step in that trap, right? So White River pack, I think they're still there. And then now we have another pack. We're calling it the Warm Springs pack. There's black wolves in that pack, though. So we counted up to 7, 8. I think is what we reported this for the census this year was I think it was solid 7. I think we're dead at set on 7. But there's no collared wolves in that pack. It was only based off the observation and cameras and routine surveys we've had, track surveys to what we've caught on camera. Them moving through, and they're pretty solid on their 7 wolves there. And then to the south, we have the Metolius pack. So they're on the Billy Chinook and our area. So they use both areas. Sounds like just talking with ODFW. And I'm not sure on the solid numbers there, but so you ultimately have 3 different packs that we know of on the reservation. And wolf management on the res, we're going to treat them just like any other listed species, or even if they're not listed, we'll manage them like a predator, like we always do. So if they get out of hands, they start depredating on livestock, we have the control measures, and we're different using non-lethal measures is the primary right now. And then we've also have funding allocated for compensation if the livestock was taken from wolves. We've had confirmed depredations here. And we haven't done payouts yet just because, some of them we didn't have the funding then, but now we do. We have a wolf committee that meets on depredations. And so if there is a depredation that happened, we'll have the committee review it and do allocation. And also if people put in for projects, like say they have a pasture and they want flagery, or they want fox lights, or they want horns out, or hut wire out to keep their animals in and keep wolves out, stuff like that. We can assist them with that. So all those resources are here. And in terms of wolves and where they move into, how they're interacting with the people. A lot of times people see wolves and they're just so excited about seeing them. And they seem to leave them alone. That's pretty common with a tribal member. Of course, you still have your other side of it. They want to shoot everything and they don't want them here. And a lot of it is just educating, understanding like there is a place for them here on the reservation. I think it's beneficial because they do assist us with ungulates, pushing them in different areas. You used to have elk herds that would just hang out in one area. Now they're kind of dispersing, using different habitats. That, in terms with the management goals, is like to bring back some of those listed species or those predators that were here, because we know they're an apex predator. But we're also seeing that they're taking undesirable animals. So we have horses here. They're taking horses. They're hunting. Primarily in the springtime when they're dropping foals. We've documented that they're actually killing their foals and feeding their pups. So yeah, so Aura 93, the one that took off down to California, he ate a lot of horse. That's probably where he ran so far.
Really?
Wow.
So,
But
yeah.
not are packs taking down adult horses, or just you're not witnessing that?
We haven't witnessed that, but I can tell you we also have a wild dog problem
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
We've actually witnessed and documented wild dogs taking down adult horses.
An adult horse.
Jeez.
That
Yeah.
is insane.
Yep. So you could only think that maybe the wolves are doing the same thing.
Wild dogs
haven't-
those are tough. It's tough critters too.
Yeah, we actually have to take care of them because they're just like the wild horses here. Get overpopulated. And it's just, a lot of it is the dogs. There's no like real codes here, like leash laws, all that stuff. It's a reservation. So dogs run wild, and I have a bunch of res dogs, and they have their own personality. And unfortunately, sometimes they pack up and take off into the woods, and they do that. So we have to take care of them that fashion. We work a lot with Fences for Fido and different other, nonprofits. They come and help us out with dogs and dog management.
That is wild. So you were about to mention it there. Are there any other things you noticed about, because you had for almost 100 years you didn't have wolves, but you had ungulates, elk and mule deer and these things, and so they're multiple generations unfamiliar with what it's like to be on a landscape with a predator that hunts in a pack, which is obviously very different than a predator that hunts by itself, like a mountain lion or something.
Yeah.
I mean, pack predators are a totally different thing. So other than the thing that you'd anticipate, which is that their predators are doing what they do, which is moving herds around to places they don't normally go. Um, I mean, what have there been any other meaningful effects to ungulate populations that have caused you any kind of concern, or doing what some folks might say called decimating populations? Are they disrupting elk to the point where they're hanging out more in towns than they are in the wilderness? Things that people are afraid of, particularly in places where there are no wolves now, but there will be.
We've we're starting to see some of that. Wolves being pushed out of the upper plateau areas down into agriculture land. So we're seeing more of that, and that causes damage to our ag fields. So we have 400 plus acres of agriculture, alfalfa, feed hay and whatnot. So there's ever since the White River Pack expanded its territory, they've been pushing these elk herds, and we've been documenting them too. Like they're, elk are being pushed out of those
Yeah.
foothills into the agriculture area, and then some of them become residential, and then now we have hunters hunting some of the ag lands, and we restrict that. So any cultivated or farmed lands, we don't allow hunting on the
Yeah.
reservation. So then people get in trouble because of it, because they're out there shooting elk off of our pivots, and that can be that could really impact us because we're trying to farm for livestock feeding, and yeah, guys out there driving around and poaching. So
Right.
that becomes conflict. And then the elk themselves, they'll damage the crop. They'll hang out on alfalfa, and if you have like say 150 to 500 head of elk on some acres of alfalfa there, they're going to do some damage, right? Regardless if they're snipping it off or how they eat compared to a horse or a cow. So that happens. I mean, the horse herds as well. Some of them are getting pushed up into areas as well where they're hard to catch and they're a lot more skittish. So those unmanaged horses, so families can't go up and ride in areas, and then the livestock as well, they're getting kind of pushed out of areas just because there's competition with everything's moving around. So that was initially the issue, but now I think it's kind of settling down to the point where, the wolves are here. They've been here for a while now, 5+ years or more with an established breeding pair. And we've already dealt with these conflicts. We had guard dogs that are being attacked in rural homes and killed. So that's happened before. And some of those guard dogs are probably cattle dogs, right? So, but our reaction to that is creating a way to assist livestock owners, and that's bringing out work dogs. So those wolf dogs will come out, and whatever, if it's a Great Pyrenees or whatever it is, we can bring out and help out the tribal member, and like, hey, we have some funding to purchase a dog or breed it. We have some dogs for your herd to help you out. They're not going to always protect you, but there'll be good guard dogs for your critters. And so that has helped out and changed. So there's growing pains here for sure, and part of the wolf management and with the ungulates, it's my thing is like, well, our numbers are up for animals, and that's really cool, right? They're not killing everything. We'll find that, part of it. The interesting part with the reservation is they have supplemental food here. So if the ungulate population does drop down, like the deer get wiped out by disease, harsh winter,
Right.
or
They switch.
you still have a livestock here that's basically wild as well. But that can be bad as well, because that population will stay at a level, because usually with the predator prey dynamic, you always think about the snowshoe hare and the lynx, right? How they go through that climatic changes. You think that the wolves and the lions and the bears will do the same thing here, but it's like they just stay at a stable population now. You can't exactly get your deer and elk population to its carrying capacity, but it's not there yet. And a lot of that's due to having horses on our landscape, I believe.
Wow.
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 So until we do that, then we can get back to a better populations. That's desirable,
Yeah.
desirable
Yeah.
livestock.
Oof.
Jeez. So
Wild.
the tribe doesn't consider horses to be native. I mean, because again, sometimes the argument is that horses were much smaller. They were kind of a different subspecies of what these horses are. They left, they came back, now they're enormous. It's a different challenge for other, in quotations, native species, but you don't consider them to be a native species in a true sense.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on what family you
Right.
talk to. So like you go down to the river, you talk to those river people, they're like, oh, we never had horses. But then you go to the plateau tribes, the Columbia Plateau tribes, like my mother's side, they could say that they had horses forever. I mean, they traded and stole a lot of horses from the Nimapus or the Nez Perce tribes. But we were really close families ties with all those tribes. They said they had them forever, but yeah, I mean, there's certain size. I categorize them as a feral unmanaged horse because a lot of the breeds that we have here were during the relocation phase. So the BIA and federal government gave us a bunch of livestock to manage and to become farmers, and so a lot of giraffe stock for pulling plows, pulling wagons were bred into these herds, and then you had the Indian ponies, which were the mixed paints, the Appaloosas were bred with those giraffe stock. And now you have this hardy animal that's just going to survive on
Right.
this harsh landscape.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
you're
just
right.
eat roughage
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah. So you could see some really healthy horses out here living off of cheatgrass and Medusa head,
I
which
know.
isn't very
It's
land.
mind blowing because I live on a horse ranch and I look at like some horses that just, folks own around here. And I'm like, what's going on with these horses, man? They always have an issue. But if you drive by a reservation, there's thousands of healthy looking horses eating. I have no idea what they're eating, And the horses in a barn around here are getting vitamins, supplements, and there's always an issue. But this horse breed that lives on reservations, I don't know what the heck they're even eating, but they look great, most of them.
Yeah. It's crazy genetics they have.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh my God, it's wild. I mean, Austin, this has been incredibly informative, man. I mean,
amazing.
This is like you've run the gamut with us, and thanks for taking some of our questions that were a little bit off the beaten path. But I mean, you just really, really fascinating how yourself and all the tribe and all the tribal members and everybody is working the land and making sure to keep it as healthy as possible. It's really, really incredible. I mean, anybody who's listening to this, definitely, watch, like I said, we'll have Austin's talk in the description so you guys can take a look at that. But my last question for you, Austin, to close us out is, when you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
When I hear the word wolf, I hear is a respectful, alpha male. That's what I hear when I say wolf. Alpha male, right? That dominant male who's kind of sets the tempo, who's the apex, the top dog. He leads the pack, right? He's the foundation of your pack. And when I served in the Marine Corps, I joined a platoon, and then our call sign was Alpha Male, and that was 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, Surveillance and Target Acquisition Platoon was Alpha Male. And I was like, oh, that's a cool call sign. And it was based off of a wolf. So, that's really cool. Then coming home and working with wolves. So
You're living it, and it's just, again, really, again, awesome to meet you, first of all, and then secondly, you have such an absolute wealth of knowledge to impart, I think, on anybody who's looking for it. So thank you for everything you did. Like I said, serving our country for one, and two, just all the stuff you're doing for the wildlands out there up in Oregon on the reservation. Really, thank you so much for talking to Steve and I. It was really, really, really awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
no, thank you guys for having me. I'm glad to share, and I open door policy here. So I always get people coming in asking questions.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. I
Thank
think,
you, guys.
of course, absolutely. Just hang tight 1 second while we sign off. How's to y'all out there, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.